may be hard on my throat because I lost my voice earlier this week. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to sorry. I'm gonna have to talk loud because I normally talk on a level that is actually very hard for it to actually come out when my voice is like this, so should probably have tried to warm up my voice. So I'll put it on my screen in a bit. I'm just trying to make sure everything's set up, but if you're watching, you say hi in chat. I want to make sure that chat. I still don't trust Google's chat pop out, so say hi in chat if you can. That'd be helpful. Tell me that you can hear me and stuff like that, and make sure everything's. It's been a couple weeks. Since I've streamed. Oh, hey. Are you... I can't quite see your picture. Your name's doesn't look familiar. But hello, welcome. I'm actually just hanging out here until 6. And 6 I'll get started writing some code, but if you want to talk about anything, that's cool too. Finally figured out how to do low latency mode for YouTube Live, which is helpful when chatting. Let's see here. Okay, cool. That's working. Oh, damn it. I lost the chat. Let's see if I reload, if it comes up. Can anybody say hi again? I'm just make sure that this is working. I guess I'll just say test. Oh, cool. I guess you're following me on Twitter? Probably. I got the link. Well, so I usually write a lot of, oh, hello. Is that Isaiah? I'm not sure I could pronounce that. Also, my voice is, I was talking about before, I actually demoed a game that I was working on, just about finished, and I demoed it earlier this week at an event, and I lost my voice because I don't normally speak loudly or that often. So excuse me of the clearing my throat that may happen here. So I'm about ready. If any of you want to talk about, I should close Slack. If any of you want to talk about Go, this would be great, but we don't have to talk about Go. We can talk about anything you want. We can talk about webhooks or however you discovered me. Just trying to ease into the streaming. I was streaming every week and doing some cool projects. They're all archived on YouTube if you go to my YouTube channel. And been working on some projects, and then I got sick and also went on vacation for a film festival. And so it's been a couple weeks, and so still getting over a lot of stuff. So I just wanted to make this a little bit easier. That's why I'm going to just kind of do some hacking on some Go. Probably put that up here. I was going to put it up at 6. Since, oh, hey there, Fernando. Looking cool. See, I like that, and I'm assuming that the low latency is actually working. Like, I replied to that fairly quickly, I'm sure. And when I was doing this without low latency, it would take like a minute for me for a round trip of conversation with chat. Alright, so I was closing Slack, closing some of the stuff I was working on before. And maybe I'll get my screen up. Normally I have this sort of obnoxious loading screen. Looks like this. But I figured I should really invest some time on that because I just grabbed some animated GIF off of Google Images, and the music's from the game that I was working on, which is actually ripped off from a Super Nintendo game. Let me get this screen on here so I can start doing stuff. I was going to work on a project. I mean, if any of you have any suggestions for things I should work on, or again, if you want to talk about, kind of do whatever you want. I'm up for whatever. I usually do polls, Twitter polls, to see, given some projects that I might want to work on, what people want to see. Where is this project? I think it's in Glider Labs. And so this project, in November, I'm going to be on Go Time, one of the podcasts for, I think it's a Changelog podcast, one of their sub-podcasts about Go. What is this thing doing? And I was hoping to announce this Go framework that I was working on. It actually came from YouTube. That's interesting. GitHub projects. Yeah, maybe, popular projects. Early days, there was Local Tunnel, which sort of evolved into my friend's project, ngrok. And then Doku is very popular. A lot of stuff in the Docker space. I worked on Docker, but I wouldn't say that that's mine. But glad you found my channel. Are you a Go developer? What programming languages do you work in? Let's see. This doesn't even have a very good README. So this is the project that I'm gonna try and prepare for a release, and when I announce on Go Time, I think is what it's called. And it's a really kind of stupid, simple library, but it's actually like 10 years of work I've gone into it, and I've been using it for pretty much all the projects that we do. It's basically, maybe about a decade ago, before GitHub, I did a startup called Deja Vu that was hosted Track and SVN. Track is sort of, the proto GitHub, where it gave you, a place to browse your source, and you have tickets and this cool roadmap and this timeline, which is actually a cool feature that I miss in a wiki. And then obviously SVN behind the scenes. So I packaged that up into a hosted service, and it was kind of taken off. That was actually when part of the process of discovering webhooks, because I wanted SVN hooks for Subversion, and the simplest way to do it was HTTP, and there weren't many people doing that. I think PayPal was one of the only examples of a webhook. There was no concept of a webhook, and so there's just like this idea of hooks and extensions actually ties into this project a lot. It's really important for building good high-level software components. I don't believe that you can build software components that are as small and as simple as they can be without some form of extensibility through hooks or plugins and stuff like this. And And so, the analogy was, okay, so now we have web apps, but these web apps are not, some of them have web APIs, but they didn't have hooks, so you couldn't modify their behavior, you couldn't integrate them very easily. So that's, I actually made a personal mission, coined and blogged and talked about webhooks. So this idea of hooks is sort of a core idea. It's sort of like the smallest form of unit of extensibility, a hook or a callback. And this project was actually a great kind of inspiration for that, because it is, it's a bunch of different systems. It's a wiki, it's kind of a bunch of different applications in one. And it has this whole plugin system which evolved, but it basically was built around this component model where you can have a high-level component, which this is written in Python, so you have a high-level Python class, and that component would be something like wiki system or web renderer or ticketing system. So what I liked is those components map to high-level functionality as opposed to some paradigm of software architecture like MVC. It's not a model, it's not a view, it's the wiki system, it's the, and so it had a much better conceptual mapping to things. And then it would have extension points, and so an extension point is basically a set of hooks or an API for some hooks that other components could hook into, and this allowed them to integrate together really well, but then just allow arbitrary new things. So, let's say you have a to-do list component, right? And, you have your add, and it's going to add it into this dictionary, but you have this observers extension point, which implements this to-do added callback, and then that's called to anything that sort of registers itself in the system. So you can create a plugin that would print things out. You could create a plugin that emails people, But now designing with these hooks, you can build much more loosely coupled systems, even the sort of core components. So it's not just about the new functionality that users can add with plugins, but building your system from the ground up in a way like this gives you much more, at least the potential for much better kind of high-level reusable components. And so I've been building a lot of applications. Command.io is public one, using this kind of framework, and kind of leads to a bunch of high-level components that hopefully can be used to quickly throw together applications of all kinds, not just web applications, because this is not specific to web or SSH or any or command line stuff. You can really use it for all of them, which is what I kind of like. And it's a really simple system. I didn't want to get too much into that, but if people want to hear more, I can talk about it more. I was just going to write some tests for it because I basically rewrote it recently after finding a way to have it also help solve a problem which I ran into before with the previous versions of this, where it would encourage globals, package level globals, and to get rid of that, you needed to have a package level. You need to represent a component not just as a package but as an object, and then those objects would have extension points and references to other things, other components, and if those references were done as globals or whatever, it becomes very difficult to test them. And so this, after kind of seeing what the Facebook dependency injection, I think it's just called inject. So Facebook came up with this library called inject that does dependency injection. It doesn't just have a great page. It does dependency injection by letting you, I don't have a very great example. They let you do dependency injection by just using some Go tags in your struct. And so when you register an object, an instance of this, it'll actually go and look to see if it has a name API registered or a planet API, or if you go by interfaces, it'll grab that and actually set that value. So what that does is it gives you, without having to do kind of, these giant constructors that you pass all your dependencies in up front and make things really verbose. And so it uses reflection and stuff like that. It's really only done up front at the start of the app, and you get a pretty powerful dependency injection. So I use that system for doing extension points and configuration based stuff. One of the cool things about this was that this sort of component framework also included the concept of configuration, which you build a bunch of components or parts of your app, they all share configuration. How do you expose that configuration to the user in a nice way? So they have a single track INI file that basically has different sections for different, more or less, they map to components, right? So every component is just defining their own configuration and then has a local reference to it in their component object. I'm trying to see if there's a good example of that on this page. I'm obviously rambling. It's about 6, so I'm going to start writing some code. I was going to write some tests for this project, but also talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about. I thought I just saw it. No. That's odd. Extension points. I'm thinking of, so some extension points aren't just a collection of observers or listeners or whatever it is. Sometimes it actually points to a specific instance, a type, which is a very common pattern in Go things when you do pluggable backends and stuff like that. And very often it's the user who's going to define what it's going to point to. Is it going to use a MySQL driver? Is it going to use Postgres driver? Whatever. And so this basically consolidates that into the same concept. You create, your generic interface, and then say that that's a configuration-based thing. And now there's a configuration file. It lets the user specify, MySQL or Postgres or whatever, and then it will automatically set it to the appropriate thing. As well as just giving you access to various kinds of, things. Everything needs configuration in a way that, can be, I just don't like this idea of creating a whole separate layer of exposing all this configuration. Every component here is a self-contained thing. So there's not a lot of code. API isn't that big, but there's a lot of context in how you use it. And I've been using this for years, but I don't really see anybody doing it. So I was pretty excited to kind of finally get the ideal API here and be able to release this in about a month or so. So I'm just trying to finish some stuff up that would be obviously necessary for a first release. A lot of which actually is writing some docs. So I might be writing some docs here too. I'm not sure how far I got on these tests. Looks like I don't have any tests here. We also don't have to talk about this. Excuse me. Kind of easing into this, so happy to talk about whatever while I'm working on this. I'll try and kind of work it out loud though. A friend of mine mentioned using this stream as a sort of like co-working, motivational thing. If you're working on your own project, let me know what you're working on, and we can kind of work on these two things together. So one of the things that I wanted to do was try and, I'm usually pretty bad at sort of organizing my code in a let's see an example of this. Very kind of dense like this. I don't use a lot of white space when I'm kind of going through that first pass. And what I hope is to actually go through and get all the code to kind of look more like this, where it's grouped into kind of functional sets with descriptions and comments and stuff like that. So it's very readable code because it's very simple code while writing these tests and stuff. So I was starting with this config module, which is kind of the main interface to working with configuration stuff. It's actually powered by Viper. A lot of what I'm trying to do here is just provide the standardization of interfaces and stuff like this. So you could actually write a different backend that doesn't use Viper if you want to create a different kind of config provider. Ultimately, this interface is just borrowed from Viper. It's pretty common among a lot of configuration systems I've seen. Go not having generics, if you want to avoid doing a lot of type assertions, a lot of APIs will have type-specific getters, basically. So this is how a lot of configuration systems work. So it's sort of like, well, let's just create a generic interface. Unmarshal, set default. Yeah, some of these are kind of, let's see, it says chat was disconnected. Hopefully the stream's not disconnected. But yeah, it says it's connected now. The provider is ultimately just, so settings can actually be anything from from a whole configuration file to a section of the configuration file. And then a provider is, it sort of has a embedded version of that. It includes that interface and some kind of bigger things, like a provider is gonna load the settings, which actually takes care of setting up, in this case, load, right? It's gonna read in the configuration files based on these and load anything from the environment. In this case, we modify, because normally when you query stuff in Viper with keys, it's, key dot subkey dot subkey. And for environment variables, you want to do that with underscores, so we replace them. I'm not sure why that's not just done by default in Viper if you want to use environment. So that's also really great, is by default. All of these applications that you build with this framework can be configurable via environment, which in the age of Docker is kind of a big deal. That's how ideally I'd configure everything, sort of based on that whole 12-factor app model. But of course, bigger things, having a configuration file or a combination of the two is really helpful. We deploy some stuff where a lot of the stuff that's specific to a release channel, like alpha or beta or stable, are done in a configuration file that's built into the container, and then the environment will specify the secrets and stuff like that. So I guess I need to document this thing, this settings interface. Keeps saying that chat keeps disconnecting and reconnecting, so I have no idea if it's actually working. Again, I never trusted. I actually think I'm going to go back to Twitch, because there's nice things about YouTube Live, but it's just sort of weird. How would I describe this? I'm totally not. You have to get into a mindset to be able to start writing documentation. To help me out, I'm going to go and look at the docs for writing Go docs. Because there's definitely some conventions and stuff that I forget about, because I'm not always documenting my code, since it changes so much, until I'm sort of like in this phase of preparing it. Well, I actually have an account on Twitch. It's Program. And Program is my username on everything, so it's pretty easy to find me on a service. But yeah, so you can actually go to Twitch now and then subscribe if you wanted to. Somebody was asking about my Twitch handle. And I want a good example of describing an interface. I might have to actually go and look at what is all this? I have to go and look at some examples. Standard library is a good place to go. Let's see, where's there a good interface? IO. Right? Which one of these is an interface? Whoa, that's funny. Yeah, I said. Apparently that's still working. So when I was using Twitch, I set that weird overlay thing up. Did you guys see that? I want to make sure I'm not crazy. But it's still there even though I'm on YouTube Live. That's funny. Yeah, writing docs is like very much a certain tone. Settings is yeah. I know. I mean, maybe on Twitch. Andy's a Twitch pro. He's seen them all. Well, see, isn't the whole point of the that overlay is so I don't have to say things. I can just ignore the people that are watching, and it'll. It's the whole point of automation, right? I know that's not like maximizing the whatever you call it. I don't know. What is the point of streaming? I'm just doing this to be in the habit of working on stuff in the open and kind of share and talk with people. Settings, so it'd be cool if you guys knew what this was so that you guys could help me write these docs, but it's also hard because I'm like not focusing. Maybe I can't write these docs on Twitch. English is harder than programming. Maybe I'll wait on that and work on the tests like I said I was going to do. Conveniently, it showed me that all of this is not tested. Although I moved all. Did I move this? So originally there was just like a config load, but I've made that part of the provider interface. I think. What do I want to do? I think this doesn't do everything though. Oh no. Oh, I see. This is the high level thing. So given a provider. Okay, so we still want this, and this still needs to be tested. Yeah, explaining it as I go, it's sort of like is a great help me better understand. I mean, I understand it. Problem is like trying to find the proper language to describe it that's in the appropriate tone and everything for Go Docs. It's a very kind of specific to the point thing. I like to talk around things, so it's very difficult for me. I have to focus really hard to actually write good docs. So back to this. So do you want to test this? This is actually what ties everything together. And get all the top level keys, iterate over them, check if any top level keys match the object. I don't know if this is kind of good enough for you to kind of visualize what's going on. The idea is in your application, like in your main, you would call a couple of things. One of them is config load, which will actually, give them the registry. This is the component registry and the provider that you want to use, and then your application name, in this case is example, and so it'll use that for looking up example underscore whatever, and where it might be able to find configuration files. And they'll kind of go and do the defaults of like looking up where the configuration might be and stuff like that. And so that's the job of load, right? So now from the environment, so yeah, example underscore config, so you could specify a path to where the config file is. And so we get that environment variable if it's set. And then we have a set of paths that was passed in of directories that this application might have configuration to look for. So we take those and we append. We actually, it looks like we split the configuration so you can provide multiple paths in your example config. Oh, Andy Shin, thanks for subbing. Is that what you wanted? So get some paths here. Yes. Okay. So now we have a bunch of directories that we can look for configuration files. And it's actually going to look for the configuration name dot whatever. Actually, because Viper supports multiple things, you could have example.json or example.yaml or whatever. And this would be expected to load that. So first it actually goes to the provider, in this case Viper, and this is where it's going to basically set up Viper in how to look up the configuration, read in the configuration, load from the environment, and ultimately return an instance of Viper that's basically wrapped in the settings interface. So when I get back from this config object, which is a settings, has a settings object here, this interface. And so we use some of it to do kind of internal stuff, but ultimately this is passed to your component so that it can actually load in the configuration however it wants, which is actually really easy with this unmarshal thing as an example here. Like this is the only code. Let's say you have some configuration for your SSH server, and here we have listen adder, and we want to put it in the struct. We implement this hook on the component initialize config. It takes a setting. It's a settings object. This is only going to be the SSH settings, and this has to be unmarshal now. Unmarshal into, so the component has a reference to config. It's actually an embedded type, but you can still reference it as if it was a composite member field, whatever. So we're getting that pointer and saying unmarshal into that. And then from then on, you'll have adder in your component. This is not all that magical because we only have one field here, but you can imagine a much more complicated or structured configuration, and all you'd have to do is this line to have your component use the configuration that the config system has used. Alternatively, you could use other methods on this like get, bool, and set things manually, or you could basically use the configuration in a lot of different ways from here. You don't have to store it in here. But the most common thing I think is going to be loading it into a struct. So I made that really easy. But we have to do some stuff first, some extra stuff that's sort of like global configuration stuff. First we need to get all the keys, and the only way to get all the keys from a settings object is to unmarshal it into a map and then just use all the keys here. So then we have our registry, which is the actual thing that this component system does. And so that's basically all the objects that are registered that might, basically all your components, anything that might have configuration. We're going to go through each of those objects. We're going to create an empty settings object by default. And then we're going to go through all the top level keys of your configuration, which should be all the sections, right? And look something like this. So web SSH. And then we're gonna look up in the registry to see, do we have a component that can be looked up by that name. So a lot of those names are short, they're aliases like web or SSH. They're registered with kind of their full path name. So we actually, it's not a direct mapping from the keys to the names of the objects. So we have this lookup method, and then we see if, did we look it up? Is it the same as the object that we're on? If so, instead of an empty settings thing, we're going to use the sub is going to grab a sub settings object from this. So it would basically be more or less a map of just this key and value, or rather this one in the case of SSH. And then break, and then check to see if that component that we have has a config initializer, which means does it implement initialize config. If it does, pass it the configuration. Now it can do whatever it wants with it. And then this is how certain fields of your component can be set by config. So in this case, we actually go look at your component, go through all the fields, and if the field is marked as a config field, then it will look up configuration setting by that name. I don't have an example of this one, but basically if you were to have like, SSH and SSH has multiple auth methods or something like this, and you want to have one auth method that implements auth method. I don't know what that is. You could say com config, and what this does is it means that your configuration can have something like auth method equals public keys or something like that. And so if there's a component registered with public keys, then it would automatically be assigned, this would automatically be assigned to that. So it's allowing the configuration to define how the components are sort of set up with their dependency injection. So it's sort of combining the idea of dependency injection with this kind of configuration-based component aspect of this config aspect of components. So that's done by our load. We basically say look it up and then assign it to that field. We also have disabled, so via the configuration you can disable certain components. So a component can be enabled and disabled. So if we had track here, you can actually just disable the wiki, which will just say, oh, when we run into the wiki component, we'll actually just not enable it. And so, for example, what that does is whenever there's anything that it would normally hook into, for example, one of the things is this menu here is generated by a callback called main menu provider, and the wiki component implements a method that says, yeah, here's an item I want you to put in that menu. It's called wiki, and it's going to link to /wiki. And so now with that component disabled, it's not going to be in the list of extensions, and so it won't be iterated over, and so that wouldn't show up here. As well as all, anything else, any other hooks that implements it wouldn't actually be called into. So it creates this really great way to enable and disable huge chunks of functionality, but you can do large chunks or small chunks and use them as feature flags. So you can use enabling and disabling components for feature flags as well. The way this is currently programmed to disable stuff is that there would be a top level disabled, and then let's see, what does it do? This is different than what it should be. For every D, true. Okay, so basically it expects something like it needs the fully qualified name for a component, so that would be something like, I'm pretty sure it's something like this, Glider Labs. It's the whole like package name, com config example. In this case, we want to disable this SSH thing. Then it's example app SSH. I think that's it. Disabled, true. Because of this fully qualified thing, it makes it really difficult. So this whole system is actually not great for like disabling stuff via the environment. This doesn't seem like it'd be fun to do via the environment. And also, ideally, you could just say SSH, disabled or something like that. Trackhouse actually had this weird thing where it would actually, in its configuration engine, it would actually parse disabled to false. So you could do something like this, it's like components, SSH disabled. I can't really do that. You can only do Boolean, so we kind of have to do this like disabled SSH. It is true that it is disabled. I don't know if you can think of something better than that. That could be helpful. I mean, in theory, this could also be a list, right? But I kind of wanted to. Actually, ultimately. So anyway, this needs some work. Better design. And then after all this is done, the registry is reloaded, and that will actually go and make sure that any of the fields here, all that stuff, just like repopulate anything that's not set and everything. So I've documented what it does inside the function with these comments. Now I have to actually describe it on the outside. What does this do? Good function. Load uses a provider. In this case, I'm not sure what the convention is for referring to another type in here. I think it would just be provider, right? It's just assuming the same context. So load uses a provider to read in configuration. From, I guess here I'll say various places, various files in the environment. I can get into specifics in another paragraph. For objects in a particular registry. Right, so we're mentioning all the inputs. It's like, okay, we have a registry, we're loading configuration for the objects in those registry, we're using the provider to read in the configuration from various files as well as the environment, the specifics of which we'll get to, but this is basically what it does. Read in, it passes settings for each object. So object is usually kind of a more generic term for component. If you didn't want to call these things components, you can just call them objects because that's what they are. So it passes settings for each object to any object that implements the the implements initializer. So if you have a component, you want to access the configuration that you might have, you implement the initializer interface. And then you get your settings to look up set config fields. Then it will look up any config-driven fields of an object. So this is the pluggable thing. So if you have a field that says it comes from config, I don't know, I'm calling that config-driven. Maybe I'd be specific. We'll look up any struct fields with config and use the settings to get the name of an object from the registry to assign. So that seems like a very convoluted thing, but I think it describes it. Then it will look up any struct fields for a particular object. And then we'll look up any struct fields with config and use the settings for that object. Is that more clear? For that object. To get the name of another object from the registry to assign to that field. I made it longer. And it's not working. I guess I can just write it and then edit it later. That's not all this does. So let's put all this up later. It also disables any objects in the registry referenced in the top level config section called disabled. That might need to be more clear. Disables. And basically just kind of high level describing kind of what it does inside. But these are important things because this is what you're getting in GoDocs. Load uses a provider to read in configuration. Okay, so now ultimately I'm going to have to write tests for this, and this is a little bit. The idea is I can test everything using the Viper provider, but instead of, because Viper actually uses a file system abstraction, that I can actually give it a fake file system to work with for the tests. I think I want GoDocs. It's set file system. So this is the project that defines an interface for working with file systems. So I could implement one of these that, in fact, imagine there's already just like a memory map FS. I think that's exactly what I want. How do I think I'd have to then write the files, like I'd have to use the interface to actually create the files. kind of funny. I kind of want to just like give it a map or something, you know. Make directory, make all, open. So I want to make directories and write. It's going to make me open, isn't it? I think there's some utility methods in here that would make it easier to do write file. So yeah, kind of like the IOUtil stuff. You can give it a file system and a file name. Here's some bytes. And so in that way, I can set up a virtual file system that it would try and load configuration from, and I can do 2 tests that would test all the various things that it's doing and how it should work. So that's like, this is a whole little project, and this is just one component of this thing. I do need to document this. I'll get to that eventually. Let's see. I guess I should just start setting that stuff up. So I guess first thing I'll do is just make an empty test or a, you know, whatever, a failing test. Nothing. Test new. And it failed. Cool. So, what should I try testing first? Ultimately, I'm going to have a registry. So I'm actually going to have to set up a registry and create some objects in it that can load configuration from. So I have to do that as well. Let's start with that. Is there a new? I don't think I have a new registry. I just have to do this. I'm gonna do this in the test and eventually refactor it out into something that maybe can be shared across tests. So I need to create some test things. Type component A. Should I be like very literal? Should I be abstract or use like metaphors? I feel like if I do like a concrete thing like wiki system, it'll confuse people. Whereas if I do like component A, it's kind of telling you what I'm trying to model here for the test. So we'll do a simple, let's see, some configuration. I hate doing this, but you know, what are some good, maybe something like setting A, setting B, something like that. And let's see. I should implement this. pointer to it. And then I want to do, in this case, I'm not doing a substructure. I'm actually just saying like, hey, this component has these fields, set them. So that makes it really easy to just do unmarshal C. So component A has configuration setting A, setting B, and if I created a file, let's see, what would that look like? Something like, okay, this is a little rough because it uses reflection and package and names. Config component. I think this should work if I say component A. And then this is going to translate it from lowercase JSON YAML land. Or no, sorry, TOML. And so we need, I guess I could just be explicit and give it and type a name over here. As an example, uses map structure. So you give it a map structure tag setting A. See, I never know exactly how it's going to do it by default, so I'll just be explicit. Setting A equals foobar. Very original. Setting B equals, oh no, as quotes. Okay, and then this will be my test. I'm going to actually test to see that some component has setting A set to foobar. We'll call it com A is a new component A. We'll forget component B for now. And I'm going to do some stuff here. But ultimately check component A, is your setting A equal to foobar? Because if it's not, then T fatal, not foobar. I'll put a better message in a bit. This is obviously going to say not foobar. Oh shit. What did I do? It doesn't like my, am I thinking of a different language? I think I am. Missing return. I think I just want to return that. And undefined registry, right, because we have a com registry. Did I get the right one? Yes, it did. Registry declared not used, config file declared not used. That's good enough. I'll keep writing this stuff. I need to put this config file in a file system. I don't even know if I have this. do? So arrow farrow new mem map fs. That's my file system. And let's see here. To sort of properly model this. Oh shit. It doesn't have any concept of the current directory, does it? That's interesting. I could just say whatever the actual current directory is, use that to create the file. What actually does that? Look up. I think it's going to do that. Look up. It's going to resolve period to current directory, which is not a thing that Go does by default. It doesn't. Nah, of course it doesn't. But it's a tilde. It doesn't resolve by default. Is there anything in here that lets me sort of, like, is this file system a stateful thing where I can say, like, the current directory is remove? I don't think so. Then I guess that's fine. I guess also I don't have to test that yet. I can have an explicit path that's loaded. I'll do that. Put it in like etc. So what is this? Write Pharaoh write file fs etc test.toml. We'll call it. Oh, it wants it to be bytes. Okay, I can do that. Make config files and bytes. And oh no, what is this file mode? What is my file mode? This is what? One of these. OS mode type. Shit. Maybe I should just do this. It's a test after all. No, I should do the right thing. It's probably going to be 644, right? And what is that? Will that work? 0644. I don't know. Okay, this is going to return error. If error fatal. Let's see if we can do that. Oh, it's not actually using. It's not foobar, but it wrote it all right. So, in theory, I can create. Oh, this is new. That makes sense. Okay, Viper new. Provider equals Viper new, which is my wrapper module, not this. So I need to change that to. Oh boy. Okay, glider labs config Viper. Well, shit, this import cycle, because this is going to include config. Oh no. So this, oh man, so this API file might need its own package because my tests need to import Viper, but Viper imports config. I really hate doing that, but there's no way around it, is there? Well, right, because it needs the types from API. Shit. I hate this because it means if you want to use config, you now have two packages that you care about, the config that actually does the stuff, and then the one that has the types that it uses, which is really frustrating. It's possible COM could just say, like, here's the generic types, and then all the types that these packages use we can put in there, but, you know, I really just prefer this, like, standalone, the types for this package stay in this package. Let's see. So in theory, we can actually make this a different package. Maybe that's what we want to do. Golang tests package. Put your test in a different package because you can call it underscore package, underscore test. And now it's not actually in the same package, which means I'll have to import this package and refer to these like this. And this is scary, but I'll just to be a little bit more clear, maybe. Okay, how's this? Provided declared not used. That's true. I don't actually use it. How about if I use it just to set? What? What? Okay, I need to actually not, I need to manually create the Viper instance because I need the underlying Viper instance. Okay. Shit, but I can't. I guess I want to make this public. I didn't want to, but I guess I will. Okay, because I'm going to have to manually create it. So our Viper new, the real Viper package though, like this, just like that. But I actually do want this too. I'm gonna have to call this something else. Viper provider, V provider. Should I just call it provider? No. God damn it. Fiber provider. Okay, so now we can do that's this, and then we can do set fs to this, and then we can create a provider that's based on Viper provider v. And now we have a provider. Now we can use load. Okay, config load. We've got registry. We've got a provider. and a name, the name of the app is test. So that's how that's going to work. And then no paths. Well, how does it know what to look up? Okay, I take that back. It's going to have one path. Let's see. Okay. So this loaded. Need to do this. We'll clean all this up eventually. I'm just going to complain because there's already an error. Ooh, config file test not found. And what's interesting, I'm assuming this is bubbling up from Viper, because it should not care what this extension is. I'm not sure if this is an artifact of Viper, but like, why is it doing that? Like, is it printing a slice? And so it's going to, of course, have, what if I did like this? So it's basically showing all the paths that it's actually looking in. Okay, yeah, so that's what it's doing. So test is not found in those directories, even though we write this thing here. I've never used this though. Is there some way I can like see what, like, show all the files? Maybe I'll just do stat. Maybe I can do stat. Stat. Nope. No, it's file system stat at cd test toml, and we'll print this out. Right, because it actually has two things. Info, screw the error. What do we got here? It's going to be a pointer to an object, so it's not going to be anything. Let's dereference it. Invalid indirect. I can't do that. Invalid indirect of type. It's already, what is this? File info is an interface. Oh, okay, so I can't. That makes sense. Name. Let's make sure that it's there. You know. Test.toml. It's there. Its size. It's not 0. It's maybe 62 characters. Okay, so this file is there, but for whatever reason, we're getting an error bubbled up from, I imagine, Viper saying config file test not found in. I imagine we're going to have to, unless it's actually not expecting an array, oh, that could be it. No, wait. set config file name. Yeah, we have a list of paths, and then we're not saying like paths equals. We're actually doing add config path for every path. So set config name. Yeah, and you know what's weird is I thought this worked. I mean, I haven't tested the demo app since all of this got changed around. Refiner. This is basic Viper stuff, and I'm surprised it's not working. I imagine this is where the error is happening. Maybe to be sure, I'll do some obnoxious log println error. So we'll get it twice. Oh shit. What's it complaining about? 39. Oh, Viper test. 39. Okay. I don't know why it wasn't. Oh, because I wasn't in that directory. Okay, and then I do this. No, I want to do this. Okay, so that is the error. That's where we get it. It is right here. Read in config. What is wrong with you? Let's go to Viper read in config. Okay. Get config file. Yeah, what is it? Yeah. If it's set, find config file. Okay. What is this JWW debug bullshit? They should be using some cool. What is JWW? The fuck is that? Whatever. Searching for config and paths. Cannot config file not found. I imagine that's this one we're seeing. And yeah, because we're saying paths, and it's like that. Yeah. Search in path. The search in path. That's this. So it's going to go for each extension and check to see if it exists. Config dot whatever. File path join exists. Some helper function hiding away here. Because it's calling it. Okay, it's not in this file, I guess. Yeah, where is this defined? Motherfucker. Util, of course. See, we've been doing that. We should be getting something back. Does not exist. Yeah, man, I don't know, man. Is there like not a where are the supported extensions? TOML. Right? So as far as I know, this should work because it's doing add config path /etc in this virtual files. We never made that directory. Yeah, well, that's kind of a weird quirk. Does it make the directory? Does the helper that I used to write the file didn't make the directory? It's probably a good thing to look at, because if it does, then that's not the problem. Okay, so there's util write file. Nope, it just tries to open it. Strange. So, I mean, we write to it and we don't get an error, but that directory doesn't exist. And so I imagine it's doing some, like, walking directories, and the directory isn't actually there. I don't know, man. I don't know how they implemented this. But if this were a real file system, we would, of course, have to do something like make directory. I'll just say all, even though it's just like etc. And it wants a fucking, okay, what is the default file mode for directories? I don't understand. So it should be 7? That's how it's, should be 7s? I mean, it's a fucking virtual directory. Still not finding it. Was there an error? I don't know. It's like a memory thing. It's not gonna... in memories / etc test TOML. I mean, whatever, I'll leave that in there. No, I won't. $755. Okay, good. Glad I looked over here. Yeah. So, okay, it's doing an exists check. What was it? Where was that? I think I lost the code I wanted to actually look at. Is there a okay, it's the exists was util exists. It's doing ff stat. We know what that returns for that path. So although, what is v? Is that like a top level thing? That's not good. What the hell is V? Yeah, that's not what we're using. Its exists function is assuming that it's using the default Viper. Is this set somewhere? Jesus. God damn it. This is what we're getting. We're getting a new instance of V created here. And yet exists is always going to use this. What a shitty piece of code. I mean, everything else about it is great, but what the fuck, man? Like, the whole point of having that file system abstraction is so that you can I don't know if I follow. You think the searches the file without an extension. Well, no, because the code that we looked at that uses this actually will iterate over every supported extension, including TOML, and append that. So we saw that code. The problem is that the exists thing is using this global V, which we're not using, so of course it's not going to find the file. If there was some way to set V, that would be cool to get around this stupid thing, but they made it private. Like reset kind of comes close. So I need something that's like V equals new, equals new. There's nothing that lets me set V. Oh my god. Is this... Yeah. Okay, so they're not even talking. They're talking about like, oh, they call the file this, but it's looking for the because depending the extensions, right? So this isn't even the problem. Well, what do I do to work around this? Create a real file. The whole point of this was to have a virtual file system, not deal with the file system because we're running tests. And then the library that we're using to abstract the file system, actually it's not the library, it's Viper. Viper that allows us to abstract the Viper file system doesn't even use that file system when looking to see if the file exists. This is incredibly obnoxious. Found a fucking bug. It's very annoying. If anybody's using, let's see, setfs. No. In the body, maybe? I don't know if this is actually searching the body. But yeah, if you use set fs, it's not going to actually set the file system in the global that you use to check to see if the file exists. What to do. Fix it locally and then submit a patch. That's, I guess, the right thing to do. Oh, God. I don't want to do that right now. Thanks, wouldn't that be that big of a deal, but a little over an hour, I think I'm a little kind of tired. It seems like a good stopping point. Now that we've determined what the problem is. Put this in here. Fix the exists util and Viper and submit PR. I mean, what else are they doing in that file that is not actually using a reference to the v dot? So we got exists, that's it. The one thing that doesn't, all they need to do is pass in the file system object right here and exists. You know? Let's see if there's other places. Where that little exists function is used. This is the only place, search and path, the one place. It doesn't even need to be a function here because it's not used anywhere else. It's like this key, functionality of looking to see if the config file exists. And like it's using a utility function that isn't even used. It could just do that right here. Okay, well, we know how to fix it. If anybody wants to fix it, submit a PR. That'd be cool. Because I'm done for now. If you guys want to contribute to open source, we found a bug together to find how to fix it. Just gotta say exists takes another object. I think VFS, right? Viper has an FS. Set FS. V.fs. We just need to pass that into exists and have exists take that and then. And actually, literally that, we wouldn't even have to change the reference because it's already referencing V. It's just that V is this global nonsense. So, that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for hanging on this with me. I'll be back next week with a cooler project. Thanks also to everybody that talked to me in chat. Made sure that was working. All right, see you next week. Bye.